Hi guys, just before we start the episode today, whatever platform you are listening to this on, whether it be on the podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, please support it. Please like, subscribe, whatever you can do. We want to reach as many people as possible. So please do that and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I am really happy and excited to have on the show Briana Gunn. And I'll just give you a bit of an introduction into Briana and her story before we get into the podcast. Briana is a naturopath and director of Healthy for Life as an expert in complex chronic health conditions underpinned by biotoxins such as Lyme, co-infections and Mould, which is why I'm super excited to have her on the show today. Her career took a different turn in 2017 when, after experiencing a series of odd and unexplainable health challenges, she actually tested positive for Borrelia, for Lyme. Using the power of herbs, nutrition, and naturopathy, she managed to recover her health and hasn't relapsed since January 2018. She continues to experience great health and high-level physical and mental functioning and is eager to share that knowledge with others so that they don't have to suffer on their own anymore. And I love the fact that we have Briana on the show because she's got, comes at it from both sides of the table, from someone who's a practitioner, but then someone who's actually also been through it. And I think that's such a unique perspective. So thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Phil.
No worries. Okay, well, let's get back into it. I guess if we could go back, because this is a bit of a different story, because you were already dealing with people who had, these kinds of issues right before you got sick. So
no, not quite.
No.
In that stage, I was much more of a generalist naturopath. I'd been in clinic about 8 years at that stage. If I had a specialty, it would have been pregnancy and preconception and early childhood. I was seeing a lot of pediatric patients. And then I wasn't well. I wasn't ever, so at the beginning, it took a lot of work to keep me as well as I felt that I should have been. I just constantly fighting gland issues, strange things. And I just remember thinking always, if I didn't put as much effort into this, I eat organic, I move, I see sunshine, we're low Wi-Fi, I'm guzzling down herbs, I'm always taking supplements. If I wasn't as conscious about those preventative measures, I knew that I would be getting sicker. And I could never quite understand why I had these swollen glands all the time. What was the infection? And now, the benefit of hindsight, I know that I'd lived in moldy houses. It was just that constant something. The house that we owned previously had a water leak in the bathroom that had just been painted over, and I didn't think much about it at that stage. The house before that, similar issue. And I think that was enough to just keep things, prime the pump, let's say. And so then when I got sick and it kind of was starting to get more and more noticeable that something was wrong, and then I went into my crashes, that's when I really started moving into biotoxins.
Okay, cool. And so if we could go back a little bit further, like when you were younger, so like in your childhood and like leading into initial adulthood, were you a completely healthy child? Like looking back on things, because when I look back on my life, I'm like, oh, well, I did have a lot of allergies. I had this and this and this, and maybe that all adds up. Was it like that for you? Were you completely healthy?
No, I was always healthy. Skin's a weakness in my family. So I had acne not acne, but I didn't have great skin as a teenager. And I had headaches a lot, which now I would think of as a liver sign for myself. But then I remember having headaches as a child as well from doing ballet dancing and things. And now I would get my child to a chiropractor. But in the 80s in Western Australia, that wasn't something that was on the menu as much. So I probably always had a structural misalignment and then a genetic or inherited liver weakness, which is common. We come from convicts in Australia. There's alcoholism all through our ancestors.
I think we had a part to play in that, probably.
Yes, I suspect there was something there from England.
So I guess it's really interesting. So I assumed that you'd had some kind of interaction with that world before you got sick, and then obviously you had to pivot once you got sick. So I guess, could you tell us, what were the initial symptoms? Could you take us through that, take us through that initial part of the story in 2017?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give you a bit of background information about tick-borne diseases in Australia, because I'm not sure if everybody's kind of on the same page with where we're at the moment. And so Australia is a country that very happily declares we have no Lyme disease in our ticks. And all the official narrative is no Lyme disease in Australia. What we do have are very unique and novel kinds of Borrelia, and they've been identified back to the 60s, 1962. Researchers in Queensland found Borrelia queenslandica is what they named.
Right. Oh, sorry, you're on mute. It just went
sorry,
on
did it cut out for a second?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Where did you get to?
You were saying in Queensland there was Borrelia.
So they're novel species in Queensland, and that they've called them Borrelia queenslandica. So we absolutely have unique species here. 2017, Murdoch University researchers from WA found Borrelia species in echidna ticks in New South Wales. 1994, Michelle Williams, PhD, Borrelia species in our ticks. So we have a good knowledge that there are Borrelia species in our ticks, and I think some of the difficulty comes from we probably don't have Borrelia burgdorferi, which is technically Lyme disease. What we do have is Borrelia in all kinds of different species that we haven't bothered to name. We haven't put the money into the research. And those Borrelia species infect humans, and they give us symptoms of Lyme disease, very, very similar, with the joint pain, the cognitive decline, sometimes a heart involvement, but less often I would see that. And that's very common in tick bites from New South Wales, Sydney region up to southern Queensland. That's the hotspot for what I call our Lyme ticks. They're the ones that give you symptoms exactly like Lyme disease, even though the Borrelia maybe isn't Borrelia burgdorferi. And then when I got bitten, I was bitten in WA. And the ticks here have something that looks more like a relapsing fever type of Lyme disease. So a 28-day cycle, maybe something that would test positive for a Borrelia miyamotoi or Hermsii, something that gives you that relapsing fever picture. So different Borrelia species maybe than other parts of the world have, but they're definitely affecting humans and they're making us sick. So going back to when I was pregnant in 2010 with my first child, we went camping. I remember being 32 weeks pregnant, and we went camping in an area just north of Perth in the Cervantes, and they're quite a historic and iconic area. There's the pinnacles there, and I remember it was very, very hot. It was February. And I was very, very pregnant and uncomfortable anyway. And I remember thinking to my husband, what are we doing? Why did we come camping in a tent when I'm enormously pregnant? I'm uncomfortable all the time anyway. I'm always hot because I'm pregnant. I remember just lying there at night in this tent and feeling like something was crawling all over me. And I was like, no, I'm just weird and pregnant. No, it's just must be sweat, or it must just be something. It's fine. And after about an hour of lying there, I was like, no, it's not fine. Just because my hands can't feel anything, I can't shake this feeling of something crawling all over me. And so I turned the light on, and I'm going to use the word millions because that's what it was. Tiny, tiny little nymph ticks, so tiny that if you touch them, you wouldn't feel them. Little tiny, tiny brown ticks. We've got the finest mesh in tents for midgie proofing, and they are walking through the no-seum fine mesh, and they are everywhere. And so I kind of didn't know anything about tick travels at that stage. And eventually I went to sleep, and I woke up in the morning and they're crawling through the sand at the beach. They're crawling everywhere, these horrible ticks. And I just said to my husband, we have to go home. I can't cope with this. I don't know the ramifications at that stage, but I could not cope with these horrible, horrible ticks. And so we went home, and my husband put everything through the dryer, and I remember putting all like the tent in black plastic bags and putting it out in the sun so it could cook and kill the ticks. And then the dogs were covered in ticks, and it took about 3 or 4 weeks for them to grow into adult stage so that we could pick them off the dogs. So I think it's safe to say that I've had some tick exposure.
Wow.
And then fast forward to 2017, the first month I thought it was a flu. So raging fever, really photosensitive, that just noise sensitive, horrible joint pain where you can't move, you cry out when you move, no appetite at all. I think it lasted only 3 or 4 days that first month. I thought that was the worst flu I've had in a long time. That's not good. And then was fine, went back to work. It's good. Next month, same thing. I think it was 5 days that time. And so that's the pattern that I fell into then. Every 28, 29 days, it would start again. And now I know, and I cringe, I was still breastfeeding my 2-year-old, because this is 2017, this stage, or 3-year-old he might have been. And that worries me, but he is asymptomatic. He's fine. So it's fine.
Yeah.
And I just fell into that every month cycle. It ended up getting up to about 11 days that I would be in a black room, couldn't move, couldn't tolerate sound. And that was hard. My hubby was working full time. We had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old. They're people who need a lot of mum time. And I don't take time off work. I was taking a week and a half off, 2 weeks off a month. The next week, I was upright, functional, but still in pain. Like when you come out of that intense pain and suffering, the next week you're still weaker. And so I was still, and then 2 great weeks, 2 perfectly normal weeks. And it was after about, I think it was the 3rd month that I started really saying, this isn't a flu. Flus don't do this recurrent thing. What could it possibly be? And I did a bit of Googling, and it looked like tick-borne relapsing fever was probably the most likely thing. And at that stage, I still thought, no, I don't want that to be the answer. It can't be the answer. But I've got great GPs in my network. I've got great other practitioners. I was working at a clinic in Perth, one of the oldest and most established clinics in Perth here. And the colleague that I co-shared the office with, she was an expert in Lyme disease. And I was just like, so what do you think? And she was like, And then I went down to this great GP who's one of the only 2 Lyme literate GPs in Perth and happens to be my GP. And I went to him and I said, what do you think? And we ran all the blood tests. And by month 4, I knew that I was extremely positive for a Borrelia species.
Wow. And do you think, God, it's blown my mind a little bit, but that it's almost like you're meant to be my guest on the show, given that, we were just talking about it before, we started, that I got my tick bite in Australia, and that everyone told me there wasn't Lyme in Australia. But I always thought, isn't it potential that there's some kind of like Borrelia that doesn't show up on a test over here? And is that what you're saying, out of interest? Is
Absolutely.
that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I generally get a better positive result if I run tests for patients through Armin or Red Labs in Europe. We seem to flag the kinds of species that we have seem to be more likely to flag the European tests than they do to run through the American labs, because it's not technically close enough to Borrelia burgdorferi to always flag that with the American labs.
Yeah, because I'll talk to you about my stuff afterwards. But
also, we have a lot of rickettsia species. We have anaplasma, we have ehrlichiosis, we have babesia, we have bartonella. We've got a full range of tick-borne things in Australia. So saying there's no Lyme and then pretending that there's also no other tick-borne diseases, I think it does a huge disservice, and it's negligent from our governing bodies and our medical associations.
Agreed. And so do you think it was death? Well, I guess you won't know, but do you think it was that camping, or that that shone the light on the fact that, you're consistently exposed to ticks?
Yeah. I had 1 tick bite as a child. And then that time, there was nothing after that though. So after that tick experience, no flu-like symptoms, nothing immediately, everything was fine. Have I been bitten by ticks since? Not that I'm aware of. Other biting insects do transmit tick-borne infections. It's anything that bites a mammal that has an infection and then also bites something else. So some types of insects, they take one blood meal, that's it for life. They're probably not going to transmit. But anything that does multiple bites, mosquitoes, horse flies, march flies. I have 2 patients who are absolutely positive for Lyme disease from bed bugs. So any multiple biters have the possibility of transmitting from one person or animal to another.
Wow.
So it could be mozzies.
It's a minefield. And so you're at this point now where you kind of realize this isn't quite right. You're getting advice from, friends in the, that have experience in this area. Like, what did you do then?
Yeah, I think I still tried to discount the test results originally. I was already taking swags of herbs. At that time, I thought maybe this is more of a strep problem. Maybe it's more of an Epstein-Barr, a viral background. And so I was taking a lot of targeted herbs in those directions, high dose nutrients, zinc, vitamin C, D, A, regular chiropractic with kinesiology aspect to it. And then I did at that stage take 2 months of doxycycline because my skin had flared right up as well. And I had a rash all over me as part of my symptom picture, weird little plaques, little circular plaques. I'm not itchy. And then the 2 months of doxy really helped. And that's when I thought, oh, we are looking at what I don't want to be looking at. There isn't any more avoiding that this could be what we're aiming at. So I feel very, very lucky in that I had a quick diagnosis, which is very, very rare. And the faster you get on top of these things, the faster you know what you're dealing with, the better your health outcomes are. So if you are listening to this and you've got a lot of mystery symptoms, keep pushing, find a different practitioner, find a different doctor, run more bloods, find answers. Don't give up when they say it's in your head. Well, everything's fine in your blood test, so you're fine. If that's the one take home a listener can get from this, is do keep finding answers. The quicker you find them, the better your outcomes are. It just prevents more systems getting involved in the damage, and then that's harder to repair. So what did I do then? I started doing infrared saunas every 2nd or 3rd day. I started doing coffee enemas. I really delved deep into Lyme disease and the different kind of options. I read all the ILADS guidelines. I read all the Horowitz. I went to webinars. I did Nicola Duchamp's Lyme Ed course, which is brilliant, and I would recommend to anybody, either a practitioner or a patient. She runs 2 of them, who need more information about this stuff, and that's not an affiliation at all. She's just a good therapist, and it's a great course. And then when I'd done that, I realized that the big piece of the puzzle that I had been overlooking was mold and SIRS. And so then I went all through the Schumacher protocol, and we've got a great doctor here, Dr. Sandeep Gupta, and he does a lovely Lyme Mould Illness Made Simple course. And again, I really highly recommend that. And those kind of gave me enough of a picture to start weaving together my background, the overlap in those treatments from the pharmaceutical perspective, turning them into natural solutions by managing the inflammatory pathways with substances that I know are safe and effective, and not needing to rely on the pharmaceuticals to do those things. And then just started pulling back from the cliff. And I feel so grateful that I had still 2 weeks a month where I had my brain still, and my training. And so I was able to jump ahead a lot faster than I think most people are able to in that situation. And with a traditional Borrelia burgdorferi infection that's consistently rubbish filling every day of the week, every day of the month, it's so much harder. So because I still had access to my brain, I was able to get out of it a bit quicker than most people are.
Did that happen? So did that happen like clockwork, like every month, like it would be the same thing?
28 days. Yeah, 28, 29 days.
Wow.
And there is, and it's not my story to tell, so I won't tell, but there is somebody else in my family who would get sick within an hour of me on the same day. and I would watch that person get sick, and I would know, oh God, quickly. Like, I remember one day we were seeing off the grandparents. We just had a great couple of days. They'd been staying with us. I was standing at the letterbox, and I thought, it's coming. It's coming upon me. And that was 11 days that I was back in a dark room that month.
Wow.
And the other person in my family, different health situation, and they were able to recover less days than me. They were always shorter recovery.
Wow. God, it's just, yeah, I can't get my head around it being, because I guess for me it's like consistently the same thing, but it's never as extreme as being in a dark room, but then I never feel how I used to feel. So
no.
Yeah.
And that's the different infections. So understanding what the co-infections are for you will be a key, and then understanding the mold picture. But for me, that major presenting infection was something that does a monthly cycle of relapsing fever. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Got lucky by getting bitten by those ticks, I
guess. And so you were really using those 2 weeks to your advantage. Like, could you take us through the next part of the story?
Yeah, I have an unusual mindset, and I reflect on this a lot. I try to block out bad things in my own experience. I remember positives. I remember great stuff in my life, and I try not to retain too many memories about the bad stuff. And it was a couple of years ago now, so excuse me if I'm a little hazy. And I remember the days after that 11 days, the next one was 9, the one after was 5. I started having less days of agony. And drenching sweats. And anybody who's ever had babesia would understand that kind of sweating of the fever response. But I haven't ever tested positive for babesia, but that's just where I hear it in my patients. And just really high doses of herbs, high doses of nutrients. The doxy, I think, really helped pull me back off the cliff at that stage as well. If I'd had my time again, and I know now something that I could have used then, I would have chosen another type of antibiotic as well, not just doxycycline, and I probably would have pushed for an extra month or 2. I kept that monthly cycle of something threatening for another 18 months. I never had any of those times where I was drenching fevers, racked with body pain, total migraines and photosensitivity, and needing to be in the dark, not moving, not eating after the January. So I think it was 7 months in total for me, and the other person in my family had another 2 months, which was very hard for me to watch, but also very motivating. And then I remember still having that monthly sense of, oh God, it's coming, something's not right. The glands would go up, I'd have headaches, my energy would go down, not enough to take time off work, but not enough to be well. And the fear, it's coming. Oh, what are we going to do? And that fear lasted with me for a long time, that every time you sort of feel like you're getting a cold or a flu, to be really concerned that it's Lyme again, or a tick-borne illness, or Borrelia of some kind again. But it wasn't that bad for me again once I come off the cliff. Actually, speaking about something that I do recall from that time that very clearly made a difference, I purchased a frequency generator machine. I purchased a Spooky 2, and that was the last time that I got very, very sick. I started running that Lyme and Morgellons protocol that comes on those Spooky 2 machines. It's a 9-month protocol. Every 3 or 4 days, you change the frequency, you run a personal scan. And we just rotated who in my family took the personal scan, and then popped all of our hair samples and fingernail samples into the machine, so it was transmitting by remote constantly. And that starts with detox and worms and molds and all different kinds of things before it starts really getting into the Lyme and Morgellons infections, and very, very effective. And I felt that was the turning point for me.
So looking back on it now, like in terms of what kind of like blew my mind when I found out about mold was that a lot of doctors were saying that quite often people focus on Lyme when actually it is mold, and mold was maybe the thing that weakened your immune system enough for you to be able to be infected by Lyme in the first place, or not to be able to deal with it. I guess it's different for different people, but what's your view on that?
Yeah. So I'll draw on my professional experience of this with patients now, because that's absolutely what I see. And there are a number of times in patients over the years where I have been certain, based on their symptoms, that they had Bartonella, with a lot of the neurological involvement. And all they ever had was leaking taps in an ensuite, and moving out of that house improved their symptoms 20 or 30%, and then we had to work together to repair further. So I think mold, so people who have access to water damage building, if you've got the human leukocyte antigen genes, the HLA genes, that mean that your parts of your white blood cells can't, your immune system can't recognize that mold is a pathogen, it starts a cascade of chaotic immune events and responses in the body. It causes a lot of inflammation, and that inflammation then starts a cascade that dysregulates the rest of the body. Hormones go out, gut goes out, sleep goes out. All the inflammatory pathways get triggered, and then they self-fulfill because the inflammatory compounds trigger more inflammatory pathways. And without that being able to be resolved with healthy detoxification, I see that mold is very commonly the thing that primes that system and gives you all of the symptoms. So if you have faulty HLA genes, and in Australia that's about 24% of people don't recognise mold properly and deal with it properly in the body. So if you've got water damaged buildings or workplaces or vehicles, that could be a problem for 1 in 4 people, and it'll run in families, obviously, because it's genetic. So if that's an experience, and then there's also a tick or an insect bite, something that gives you one of those tick-borne illnesses, yes, your inflammatory pathways are already primed, your immune system's already dysfunctional. It could be the crash, whereas somebody else on that same camping trip, some of your friends, they're fine. What I see in people who have tick-borne diseases, every single one of my patients with tick-borne diseases or a biotoxin illness or existing, so Bartonella, I consider as a biotoxin illness, but technically it's not. Borrelia and Babesia are. If you have those things, mold will affect you. So if you're recovering from those things, that you know you have those infections, you also have to live in a mold-free environment to get well, because or else mold is just keeping that inflammatory cascade going, and you can't resolve the immune problem.
Okay. And so I think I mentioned it before we started recording, but something that through doing this podcast and having a lot of guests on, and they've talked a lot about, particularly with mold, but also, you know, with people who've had CFS and stuff like that, like brain retraining and like and limbic system retraining, that side of things. Is that something that could you? And I don't know, I put myself in this camp that I've tried so much, but I've never actually addressed that side of things. And so my nervous system still thinks I'm in such danger. And before I address that, it's going to be really difficult. Is that something you work on as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
And there's different times when I might layer that in, depending on the patient and their symptoms and their level of overwhelm or coping, to get that last. So on the whole, I can usually see very, very good improvement, 60-80% with herbs, nutritional supplements, saunas, improving the detox pathways, getting the mitochondria working better, getting the immune system back on board so that it can recognize stealth infections and do its work and resolve them, getting the lymph vessels flowing so you can take that immune junk and get it out of the body. Once we've got that very good improvement and stabilization of symptoms, we need to teach the body that it is safe. Because if you've been sick for a long time and all of the stuff that comes with that, to be fully well, we need to resolve the trauma. And so whether that's hypnotherapy or some of the things that you've just discussed with the Gupta program or the DNRS, or we've got an Australian one as well that's good and very, very cheap, or kinesiology, Reiki, sound healing, whatever it is that resonates with you, do that thing and keep doing it. And if you find after a few sessions that it's not the right resonance for you and you're not getting the results you want, shift. Bringing in talk therapy as well to understand. A trauma-informed talk therapist can be pivotal in understanding some of the things that you've lost and experienced. I think all of the angles need to be addressed in chronic diseases. You can't just look at the body as chemistry. We have to look at the body as physics and emotions as well.
The reason why I like that is because when you start to get this long list, which I'm sure all of your patients have, of all the things that they have and all the things that are wrong with them, suddenly you're just thinking, oh my God, there's a lot I need to get out of my body for me to get well again. And I think when you start to think that actually, if your nervous system is operating in the way it should and it believes it's safe, it means that it will mean that the rest of, all of the systems are working together, and that you can actually heal yourself far more effectively. And that just feels a nicer way to think about it. Is that kind of what it is in your view, in that respect? If that is the final like piece of the puzzle that they need to, it's that their body's almost still on high alert and therefore not allowing them to recover.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be mindful here, because to generalize, I could say with some degree of confidence, everybody in the chronic illness world has been told this is in your head at some point.
Yeah.
So when I'm speaking about this, I'm not saying this is an imaginary disease in any way, shape, or form.
Oh,
I
yeah.
hope that nobody hears that.
Yeah.
This is absolutely real, and we need to do a lot of medical interventions to support healing, but we also need to support the nervous system and the emotions to recover as well, because stimulating the cells to work better and the immune system to work better, cortisol is very, very inflammatory. When you're not safe and you're flooded with cortisol, you cannot have your immune system working in the way that it needs to. Your natural killer cells can't see properly, your macrophages can't resolve. Very important parts of the immune system are disabled by cortisol. So we need to get the cortisol down so the immune system can work. And I think it's a trap that maybe comes from modern medicine, with experts being experts in different parts of the human body, gastroenterologist or vascular doctor or neurologist, all separate. Holistic medicine, the body as a whole. Your nerves are not separate from your gut, are not separate from your immune system, are not separate from anything. And it can be easy to think, well, I've got 15 symptoms, I need to target them all one by one to get resolution of these problems. No, not generally. You don't. You need to work out what are the things that are holding the system in this dysfunctional loop and heal those. So healing the trauma, healing the nervous system, getting the immune system to do its job again. And looking after the gut often. And then once you've kind of done those initial things, then you realize, actually my hormones are kind of screwed too. And we'll come back and we'll look at that. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that every single one of these symptoms is going to be a number of weeks or months to repair one by one. Because if you can start getting the immune system to do its job better, a lot of them resolve. If you can start getting the nervous system to feel safe, a lot of them resolve.
We talked a little bit before we started recording, and I talk a lot about it on the podcast, about like belief that you're going to recover, and that doubt. And I spoke about it on some podcast quite recently, actually, when I was like, I think everyone who's chronically ill, or a lot of people who've been ill for a long time, think that there's something unique about them that means that they won't recover. There's something that people aren't detecting, and there's something that's different about them and I've definitely had this belief, and I'm still trying to get away, and I'm slowly, as I'm realizing that everyone listening to this, well, a lot of people listening to this probably have that same belief. Do you feel like that is a big limiting factor with someone's recovery, if they can't truly believe in their own recovery, and if they have these reservations and they think that there's something special about them, for example, that means they won't recover? Is that something that is a big thing for them to work on?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So there's a couple of angles there that I think are interesting. Coming out of the kind of 90s and the idea of The Secret, and the 2000s, where the belief was that we manifest our reality and that you've created this disease in yourself as your karma, or as you've thought it or something. I think we can step away from that idea. You didn't make yourself sick because you thought you deserved it. So just let that go. But then the other angle there, and I came to this by looking through all of my patient files in January this last year. And I really wanted to understand, what are the factors that I'm seeing across all of my patients who get well? And by well, I mean very, very well enough to work full time, run marathons, have babies. I mean, better than their peers well. And what are the people who aren't having the shifts that I want to see? And what are the people who are kind of getting well in some areas but not others. What's going on here? And one of the real factors was the people who believed they would get well and that counted their successes when they occurred and that didn't drown in the days when things were hard were the people that got significantly better. And so again, that's not me saying ignore your symptoms. This is all in your head. That's me saying acknowledge if you take a herb and it gives you a herx, but don't dwell on that. Say, oh yeah, I took this herb and it was really creating warfare in my body and it was really doing something powerful. Rather than saying, I took this herb and it made me feel sick and I couldn't get off the couch for 3 days and I had to call in sick to work. And if you tell yourself in that way that bad things are happening to you, your viewpoint keeps you there. Whereas if you say, yeah, I just started a war in my body and God, it hurt, but we got some progress, I'm going forwards, you will get better.
Yeah.
And so keeping that positive mindset, counting the blessings, counting the wins, focusing on what's possible. And health and vitality is your right as a mammal. You can go back to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think because something I kind of that seems similar to that is like, for as an example, is I would, if I'd had, because I know how important my sleep has been really bad over the years, and I know how important sleep is. So when I have a terrible night's sleep and I feel terrible after that, I start to beat myself up and I'm like, I've just undone the good work that's been done. And I know that's a stupid way to think about it, but because I know how important it is, I feel like, oh, I've gone back 2 steps rather than go forward. And that's exactly what you're saying, right? That, that's not the case. Like if you have a good night's sleep tonight, you've just got to keep moving forward. And I think it's those stories we tell ourselves that, actually end up manifesting, in the way that, you're telling yourself. And do you find that people do beat themselves up a little bit too much about those kinds of things in their recovery?
Sometimes we can focus on, I think focusing on the small stuff is never particularly helpful. So if you're thinking over the month, wow, I had 20 great days of sleep 6 months ago, the best I could hope for was 5 days of good sleep. If you're counting that as a gain, that's great. Whereas if you're focused on the small thing of, oh, I had 10 bad days of sleep still, and it's 10 and it's bad, flip the dialogue on that in your own head and count how much better it was than some other time. And sometimes when you have been sick a long time and things are in a flare situation and you feel like you're going backwards, that is terrifying. That is an awful place to be in. But know that when you're in that position this time, you have a whole lot of more knowledge and more experience and more tools at your disposal to come back to better health again. And that life occurs in cycles. It's not all one big happy roller coaster going up. Sometimes there's ups and downs, and that is a normal part of life. There's winter as well as summer in every year. There's the dark moon and the full moon. It's okay to have different parts of life.
Yeah. Actually, someone once told me that there was, I think I might have said it on an episode before, that life is full of like big cycles and small cycles. And you have like a tiny cycle, even within an hour, but within a day I know I said to my girlfriend when we were traveling, because when you're traveling, you have a lot of bad stuff that happens. And whenever I was like, it's okay. We're at the bottom of the cycle. Good stuff's about to start happening. That's the top of the cycle's coming. And so, I think it was a really cool way to think about it. Going back to your story, obviously your life through having going through what you've been through and what you're doing now professionally has changed significantly, I imagine. Could you talk us through that and I guess the ways in which maybe your life is better as a result of what you've been through?
Yeah, sure. So once I'd spent a lot of time really unpacking what the variables were, what the diseases were, what the solutions were, and really identifying how alone I had felt, even with a very, very fast diagnosis in tick-borne illnesses, lightning fast compared to most of my patients, straight away to the top people in my city that have knowledge and can help, I still felt very much like I didn't know who to turn to. Who can help me? Who knows more than me? And so straight away I realized that is not something I want anybody else to feel. And so I really just opened up supporting people with tick-borne illnesses and biotoxin illnesses in my practice, so that other people wouldn't have to go through that experience of what do I do? I wanted to provide the knowledge to help people, and that has changed lives. So a benefit in me professionally, the amount of lives from people who really thought they were never going to have a life that now do, that is hugely rewarding. I've had 3 babies for people who thought they would never, ever have a child after their Lyme disease diagnosis, people who were sick all through their teens and their 20s, and they thought, this door is shut to me. And the babies are healthy. The babies are healthy and life is fine. I've got people who are back at work. It's people who've gotten married and they never thought they'd even be able to leave the house to meet someone. Life is very, very possible after these things. And in my own personal experience, yes, I turned it around and I made it a positive to help other people professionally. But in my own life, it really gave me an opportunity to think about what is the stuff that I do, that I spend my time and my money on, that doesn't serve me. What are the things that I'm doing that I actually really enjoy? And what are the things that I would love to say yes to if this was my last year on earth and this was never going to get better than this and all I was ever going to have was 2 weeks a month? What do I really want to do? And I started doing those things. And for me, that was a lot more travel. We sold our house, we bought a caravan, I took my business online, and we have spent the last 4 years traveling, because that was the stuff that I didn't want to miss out on. I didn't want to miss out on that time with my kids and my family. I didn't want to get stuck in a box in Perth for the rest of my life, wishing that I could have a different life, but not. Now is the only day we have.
Wow. That's amazing, by the way. I didn't realize that. That's so cool.
No one does. I don't talk about it. It's
wow.
not a thing that I share at all for a number of reasons. Yeah, and kind of coming into this session with you, Phil, in this chat, knowing that I would probably come up and that I would need to disclose that. Yeah, it's just not relevant to my patients. When they see me via Skype, it doesn't matter where I am. Where I am is with them in that 30-minute consult.
Yeah.
And so we talk about them.
I mean, personally, if I was dealing with a practitioner that was doing what you're doing, I would love that. But I don't know whether that's just because because
you're a traveler too.
Yeah, well, I am, and I speak to my girlfriend about it quite a lot. Like in terms of like us, I think the norm is that you have to settle down and stay in one place. Like once you have children and that side of things, and that's because it maybe is more difficult at times when you have children to go and do that. Then you then just revert back to doing that. But I love the fact that you're just like, no, we can go and do something that people aren't doing. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. So I homeschooled my kids. We've always homeschooled our kids, which gives us the freedom to learn and teach them by going to a place and doing it rather than reading about it in a book.
Wow.
When we want to learn about marine biology, my children in the last couple of years have snorkeled on the Great Barrier Reef. They've been up in Exmouth on the Ningaloo Reef. These are World Heritage areas. We've been at turtle matings, at turtle nestings, at turtle hatchings, to see the whole life cycle, rather than just a worksheet in a book, in a classroom.
Awesome.
That's
so cool. Are you in it? So are you in a caravan right now?
No, I'm not. We are on a farm right now.
Okay.
Very dear friends of ours have this amazing sustainable farm and garden, and there's a lot of recycled materials here, and it's abundant food garden, and I love it here.
Wow. We went down a side route, but I found that very interesting. So
and take the barriers off your life. What do you want to do? Do it. Like I just have this trusty little like white screen background, and I've been sitting in a catamaran sailing while I've worked. Sometimes the only place in a house, my dad's house in Thailand, the only place is his wardrobe in his bedroom. It's the only place that's quiet and has a door. So I've worked for my father's wardrobe. I've worked from caravans and camper vans all through Australia and New Zealand. I've worked from Airbnbs and villas. Just
Awesome.
Make your life work for you.
Yeah, definitely. And so going back to, I guess your story, looking back on it, and there'll be people here that I guess maybe, you said you were, lucky that you got it early. However, at times where you were in the dark, not knowing what's going on, worried, I'm sure all of those normal thoughts came into your mind of like, is this going to go on forever? How is this going to look for me and my children, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
In those times, like relating that to, the people who are listening to that now, what would be your advice to someone going through something similar now and they're at their darkest time and they don't know how to move forwards? What would be your advice to them?
Just take the next step. Whatever that is for you, whatever it is that you're drawn to, whatever it is that somebody mentioned on a Facebook group that you're on and you felt a resonance with that, do that thing. And then if you go to a GP or a specialist and you don't get anything from them, try again, try a new one. Just take the next step until you find the road that leads you to healing. Because each step that you take, even if it might not give you the resolution that you want in that moment, it's still a step closer to the outcome, because you realize all the dead ends are behind you. You get to a point where all that is in front of you is the healing pathway. So keep trying, keep taking the thing, keep doing the thing.
I feel like you're speaking to me here, and I'm taking it all in. That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and telling your story, and also giving me a little bit of inspiration to keep living life in a bit of a different way. I love that. And if people wanted to connect with you, work with you, or just I guess just maybe ask any questions about your story if possible, how would they go and how would they do that?
So my website has all of the bookings for working with me as a patient. Everything's booked online, and then it's via Skype. So that's nice and easy. It's just, you probably put the link somewhere, but it's brianagunn.com. So it's just my full name. My socials are all in the same: Briana Gunn Naturopathy, Facebook and Instagram. I do answer a lot of messages on those platforms, so that's probably the easiest way to get to me. Otherwise, my website has contact details for my receptionist, has my email address, so it's easy to find me. If you Google my name, Briana Gunn, I'm the first many pages of all of the search engines, so you will find me.
Good. And so if someone just did have a specific question about something you brought up today and we didn't talk about it, is that okay for them to message you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Or if it's a non-confidential question, pop it in the comment section when Phil puts this up on his Instagram page as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I know it's later on there, so in Australia. So thank you so much for spending the time, and I'm so excited to get this out and for people to listen to it.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm glad to be of help.